Welcome, Daisy. Again, we're really happy to have you. And how about if you take a minute and introduce yourself and tell us, who you are and what you do and what you're going to teach us tonight.
Sure. So I'm Daisy Olsen. I live in New Hampshire, so not too terribly far away from you all. I currently am working for Automattic as a developer relations wrangler. They love that word at Automattic. But what that really means is reaching out to developer users, people that are using WordPress to build sites, people that are building plugins and themes for WordPress, reaching out even into agency world where maybe you're not only using WordPress, but it's still part of your workflow. So I do that now, but previously I've done a little bit of agency work. I spent 2 years working for a WordPress focused agency, and before that I worked for Studio Press. So I have some background in theming as well. So that's kind of me in a nutshell. I've been working with WordPress since about 2007. I did some speaking early on in my WordPress career, 2009, 2010. But this is the first time I've done a presentation in a pretty long time. So this is new to do it online, but I'm really looking forward to the topic that we have here. I think it can be I think there's a lot of power and really cool stuff that you can do with this feature of the block editor. So.
Excellent. We're excited to learn.
Yeah, really happy to have you. Thanks.
And I'm a huge Genesis fan.
Yeah, 2009. I started in 2010, early 2010, WordCamp Boston. I did a talk rolling as Genesis was rolling out of beta, and that was actually when I got hired to be the first official Genesis support person. So, that kicked it all off for me as far as being able to have a full-time WordPress oriented career. So, very cool. All right, so I think we have a lot of ground to cover. I'm hoping that we'll have some time for you guys to work with the editor a little bit and maybe even to register a block pattern. So what I've done, in my instructions, I said to create a boilerplate plugin. After thinking about it and right before we all got on the call, I instead created a quick, much more simplified plugin to share with you. So I'm going to drop the link to that in the chat here so that you can grab it and install it. If you have any problems with the download, I'll try to figure that out, but it should work. It's very simple. It's got one block pattern registered already. And then it's actually got technically two block patterns, but one of them just has an empty paragraph in it. So that's the one we're going to play with when we get to the point in the workshop. So first, a little bit of what block patterns are, what they are not, when they came along, just to get a little bit of background. So the core editor, as we call it, when it's part of WordPress itself, as opposed to Gutenberg when we're talking about the plugin with new features being developed. In version 5.5 of WordPress, which was only a few months ago, this new feature called block patterns was introduced. It is not very widely used yet. I've only been able to find a handful of plugins and themes that are actually making use of this feature. What it allows you to do is to save pre-configured blocks. They can be very complex or very simple depending on your needs. And you save them into either a theme or a plugin and a register code, similar to the way you would register a widget, let's say. It's fairly simple as far as the code structure goes. It's not really complicated. Once you kind of understand the way it's structured, someone with just a little bit of coding experience should be able to do this. There are a couple of little gotchas that we'll go over. So what it allows you to do is to would it be possible for me to share my screen? I think it might be a little easier if I can demonstrate some of this.
Yeah, let me just make you a co-host real quick.
Okay.
Welcome, Brittany.
So Daisy, you should be able to share.
Oh, I see it. I have way too many things open. Let's see if I can find the right thing to share. Okay. All right, can you see my demo site here? It says core block patterns at the top.
Yep.
Okay, so WordPress by default comes with a number of block patterns already registered for you. And what I did here is just added them exactly the way that they are. So there's this 2 buttons one. There's a 3 buttons one. You'll see a lot of Don Quixote references throughout all of this boilerplate content. 2 columns of text. And then you can have 2 columns of text with some images. 3 columns of text with buttons. 2 images of other side by side. This is a heading. Might be interesting depending on what your site, how your site's structured. A large header with a heading and a button. This would be really cool for a call to action. Heading with a paragraph, and then a quote. So these are all just very simple things that you could probably just configure yourself in just a few minutes. So if you are in a post edit screen, you see the block editor as you normally would. And then if you use this insertion point up in the upper left corner, you'll see there's a tab for blocks and there's a tab for patterns. And here you can see all of the block patterns that are registered. And once you get down to the bottom, then I've got a category called My Custom Patterns. And these are the ones that I created.
Daisy,
So
do you want
there's
us to interrupt you with questions or wait till the end?
Why don't you interrupt me? Let's try it that way. If it gets too disruptive, then we can change that.
Sounds good. So real quick, when you say registered patterns, do you mean registered by anybody or like global, or is this just patterns I've registered on my sites, or?
That's an excellent question. For right now, these are only registered on your site. So in the case of the default ones, they are registered as part of WordPress's core code. So these buttons, the columns, these are all just part of WordPress. If there are really 3 other ways you can get a block pattern registered. You can get a block pattern registered in a plugin. You can get a block pattern registered in a theme, or you can get a block pattern registered using a plugin that allows you to add a UI to the, like an interface to create them. That is not part of core, but there are a number of plugins in the repo that are geared towards that. So there are actually more plugins that will allow you to save a block pattern than there are plugins that register block patterns at the moment. So it seems like there's a desire to be able to do this from the WordPress admin in the community. So a note about some vocabulary. So the block editor is complex and amazing and sometimes frustrating, but when you're talking about blocks are the actual piece of content that you add into your content using the block editor. This site is basically completely vanilla. These are only the core blocks. Plugins and themes will add lots and lots of blocks as well. And you probably, if you're using the block editor, you probably have seen that. There's a feature also called variations, block variations, and I believe that right now the only core block that uses this is the columns block, and that's this first feature that you get when you add the block, you get an option to select from a few options. Typically, when you have a variation, you get one chance to set this information, and then it's fixed. So if you wanted to go to a different one, you'd have to add the block again. So, and that's how that works. There's also something called block styles. So if I go in here and do I think a pull quote has some, those are, once you've added your quote, you can actually add the text, and you can configure the whole thing. And then you can choose from the available styles. It is possible to register styles. We won't cover that here today, but themes frequently will register extra styles. So you can see the default looks like that, and then there's a solid color. So it doesn't change very much in this case. So those are different things though. So when we're talking about block patterns, we're talking about a group of blocks that have been saved in such a way that they can very easily be inserted into your content. So I just added the 2-button one. In this case, it's one block. It's a button block. And then this button block, the buttons are within that button block. And technically they're also separate blocks, but they get added all at once. But if you were to add a more complex pattern, you could have many blocks. So in this case, I have a median text block that has some buttons in it. It's got a few headings in it. It's got a list block. It's got a paragraph block. It's got a gallery block. So all of these things now that I've added this block can be configured. So I've got a YouTube URL block. And so basically the idea here is that you would have all of the building blocks for a consistent layout registered as a block pattern so that you can access it again and again. One of the ways that this might be very useful for those of you building sites for yourself or for clients is staying on brand. You want to try to make sure that they have the clients have a way to easily access what their buttons should look like or what their opt-in form should look like, and then they can use it around their site in different ways. If you were working with someone that had a staff directory and it was just going to be a simple page using blocks, you could have a way to add a new row with 3 people or add a single individual's information already configured, and then all you have to do is add the content to it. So just for an example, let me get back out to the main site here. I created this. So this is, I kind of was looking for inspiration and I ended up at Pet Finder. So this would be an outline of how you would set up to adopt a dog, so or a pet. So I've got an image here. I've got a button to get more information. I've got information about where this animal is currently, the adoption process, pretty simple steps, where to get to the application, a few more gallery images, a video on YouTube that's an embed, moving down into more detail, like actual details about the animal, some more information about the animal, and then a little bit of a bio. So this is already configured. The way that I registered the block pattern was without all of the information already populated. So if you use the block pattern, you would then go in and add all the details. But anything that would be consistent from one instance to the next would be auto-populated. Any questions about that so far?
Did you see the question in the chat box?
I did not. I've lost the chat box. One
Okay,
second, please.
Yeah, that's for me. was asking how are block patterns different from reusable blocks? I've seen where some people
That is
have
an excellent question.
reusable blocks together and then make a big honking block out of a few blocks.
So the idea behind reusable blocks is to have blocks stored that will get used across your site in multiple places, and they are managed centrally. They're managed in one location. So if you update the reusable block, it'll send all that change out to anywhere that reusable block is used on your site. A lot of people have used reusable blocks as a workaround to have these kinds of saved blocks that you can use again and again. And in order to do that, you would save your reusable block, convert the block that you saved as a reusable block to a regular block, and then you would add that reusable block, and then you have to convert it again each time you use it. So there is an extra step involved in order to kind of get the same idea of saved layouts using reusable blocks, but it can be done. And it often has been done, especially up until the point where reusable blocks became an option.
Daisy, you're
Does
saying,
that make sense?
you're saying reuse. Are you basically going to go into the block storage area and take that block, and it's going to have this first pattern and you're just going to replace everything? Or is that being fed from a spreadsheet or something else? I'm trying to figure out what.
Okay, so reusable blocks are actually a custom post type, similar to posts or pages, or there are lots of post types used in WordPress. A lot of plugins will use them. So it's a post type that is not readily accessible to you in the user interface. So
Okay.
if you are creating a post, I'll show you what you have to do to get to these. Okay, so you create your block. Let's we'll just make a quick embed. Oops. Let me see. Okay, so I have this. That was not the YouTube link I thought I was going to get. Okay, so I have this block that I've saved here. I can use the three dots and I can say add to reusable blocks. Okay, so now this is a reusable block.
So it's a pattern. It's a template.
It's a global block.
Okay.
So it's saved in one place and it can be used in multiple places. So
right.
Okay. So I'm going to save this. Okay, and if I go and create a new page, okay, I'm going to save this one. I know we're a little off track here, but I think this is kind of an important distinction between what a reusable block is and what a block pattern is. So I think it's definitely worth the time to explore this just a little bit.
Absolutely.
Let me get out of full screen mode. Okay, so I'm going to make a new post. Okay, and now if I search for a block, actually, now that I have reusable, I've saved a reusable block. So when I use the inserter up on the left, it adds reusable here. I can do this.
Okay,
and
so
I can add that same block. It's exactly the same. Okay, if I would, and so I'm going to publish this.
1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15.
I muted.
So while you're, Daisy, while you're working on that, I think I
Yes.
just want to explain and correct me if you disagree, but to kind of help summarize the difference here, a reusable block is something you want the same throughout the site. So the example she's using here, the reusable block could have the heading and that same video on multiple pages. The difference is you would create a pattern if you wanted to have a heading with the video below it, but maybe the video is going to be different on each page. Then you would use a pattern rather than a reusable block.
Right. So if I have this in two places, something is messed up here. I don't know what happened, but it's not rendering the YouTube link.
Live demo, that's
So
why.
of
Now,
course, it always happens. So if I have two posts that are using that same reusable block and I edit the reusable block, it'll change in both places.
that was my question.
Okay, so that's what I mean by global. It means it's being centrally managed. So block patterns are not centrally managed. Block patterns are more like templates. They're more like, they're not called templates because templates is used in a lot of different ways in WordPress. So they've called them patterns. I find it to be just a little confusing when you're trying to get all the terminology straight, but
So the design,
that is the way it goes.
the design is connected to all the blocks that are the same.
The
And if
design is
I had
connected.
20 different dogs and somebody wanted to add a new dog, if they use a reusable block, the pattern will all be the same and it will all match.
If you use a reusable block, you have one dog.
You just
Not 5. They
But
would
what
always
if you
be the
want-
same dog.
It's always the same dog.
That's what a reusable block would do. So you would use that for an opt-in form, where you want to use the same opt-in form on 5 or 6 different places on your site, and you want them to all look the same. And then if you want to make a change to it, you want it to go across the whole site. You might use it for something like an about your company, where you might have a paragraph of text that you would have that you only want to update one time to go across your whole site. So that's where reusable blocks are very useful.
But you were saying that people who were trying to achieve what we can do with block patterns were doing a workaround before where they would convert the reusable block to a regular block and then fill it in so it doesn't affect the other ones. But now we don't have to do that because we can do block patterns.
Right.
Okay.
But to do block patterns without any extra plugins, you have to do them in your code. So it's not all in your user interface. It's not all within the WordPress admin area. So if you have so this is my reusable block, I can click the convert to regular block and then it goes back. And now this would be managed only in this one post. It's just a regular block again. So let's switch over to some code. I'm gonna share a different screen here. It's probably very big. Okay, hopefully that was visible to you all. Is the dark theme hard to read for anyone? It's okay. Okay.
I think it's okay.
All right, so this is the plugin that I shared with you. So it's got the basic header that lets WordPress understand what it's looking at. I've added an action that basically tells WordPress that I want you to do this code. This is not strictly necessary in a plugin. You could do it without this, but if you were putting this in your theme, it would need to be there. And if you're adding this to a theme, it would typically go into a functions.php file or something that's called in through functions.php. So I have my wrapper function that I've called my register block patterns. And then I check to make sure that my WordPress install actually can understand the code that I'm about to use. So it's checking to see that this class exists. If you were on a very old version of WordPress, you'd want to have this in there so you don't accidentally white screen your site. And then there are two things that we're doing. We're first registering a block pattern category, which allows WordPress to take what could become an extremely long list of block patterns and break them down into sections so that you can see just a subsection of the block patterns. Currently in WordPress 5.5, they're just all in a list and you have to find it. But in 5.6, which is coming in 1 week, there will be a drop down that you select from a list of the categories of your block patterns, and then you would see only those that are in that category. So once 5.6 is out, it'll be a useful way to narrow down your options so that it's not overwhelming. So I've created a category called My Custom Patterns. This looks a little bit more complex here because I've got the name of it and then I have my patterns at the end. This part at the end is for translations. It's so you can localize your code so that this could be translated to another language. It's just a good practice to do this, to wrap it in this type of a format so that if you were to need to localize your code, it could be picked up by something like the WPML. So, and this is a very, very simple block pattern. So the register underscore block underscore pattern is the function that you use to register a block pattern. You only have a few things that you need. In an array, you're going to set a title, a description, categories, and content. The only two things that are actually required here are title and content. The title is so that you know what it's called. I'm calling this one my first block pattern. And then the content is copied out of your WordPress block editor. So if you have a new post, you save your block pattern just the way you want it. You switch to the code view. You take all that code and you drop it in here between this opening and this closing tick mark. If you have any other apostrophes in your content, you'll need to escape them. Otherwise, it's all going to fall apart. And to escape them, you're just going to, put the right mark in front of it to escape it, which I've completely forgotten if it's a / or a backslash. I think it's a / or a backslash actually, since we use / in the HTML. What a block consists of is just HTML markup wrapped in opening and closing comment tags so that WordPress can take that content and do stuff with it. So a lot of rendering happens on the front end before it's output. But if you were to not have the block editor anymore, all that HTML is still there so that you still have your content in place. So it is backwards compatible in that way. This register block pattern here has all the same things. I've got a block pattern called pet details. I've got a description. I added my category. I gave it some content, but in this case, the content is quite long because I have a lot of blocks in my content. So let me switch back again to my other screen. And I just want to show you how to access this code. So I'm in this, what used to be a reusable block. It's just one simple block. Up in the upper right-hand corner, there's more tools and options. It's the 3 dots next to the gear. You click on that and you can go into code editor. And here you can see this is the code for this block. And it could be quite long if you have a lot of complex or nested blocks. So in this case, it's just a single block. So if I wanted to take this block, I can put it into my plugin. And I'm not going to show you this because I I'm just replacing that empty paragraph that I had before with this instead.
Can I interrupt you with a question?
Of course.
So taking the markup from the block, what are the chances that the markup, say the classes, or the way that WordPress is coding the block changes over time? In other words, if use YouTube as an example, if the YouTube block changes in version 6.7, I'm pretty sure this will render, the old code will render, but I'm wondering if there's a way that you can grab the block source in an abstract way, like reference it by some object. I know that's a real stupid geeky question, but it just occurred to me.
It's possible, but I think the team that works on the editor is always focused on trying to stay backwards compatible. So I think where it would be more likely to happen is if you have a third-party block that might change more over time than a core block. So yeah, there is a chance that could happen. But as far as registering a pattern, it wouldn't be, this isn't the way that you would want to do that if you want to try to stay up with changes to the block. However, I will say that any time you've used that block in the past would also be affected by changes. So
that's true. Yep.
Because this markup is part of your content, so it's there forever.
Right.
And it's there, it's that way for a really good reason. So one of the beauties of the way that the block editor saves its code is that it will, one, you can switch it back and forth between blocks and non-blocks. And then if you have really old content that hasn't been updated for the block editor, it'll still work. So it isn't like you have to convert all of your content in order for it to still display in WordPress, regardless of the changes that have been made to the editor.
Got it. Okay.
Okay.
Good to know.
But I understand where you're coming from, where you'd like to try to get back into the code a little bit to grab that instead of right from the editor.
That's how I think, unfortunately.
And I think that's how WordPress has trained us to think to a large degree. If you think about how you would work with a widget, you'd probably extend the widget with PHP, and the block editor is moving us further and further away from relying on PHP. We still do, obviously, but there's a whole lot of React going on in there that I don't even begin to fully wrap my head around. But one of the nice things about block patterns is you don't have to know JavaScript in order to make them. So, okay. I lost my train of thought. Oh, I was going to, so I'm going to switch back to the visual editor. I'm going to refresh this now. And now, theoretically, my pattern should be saved here. And so I can use that pattern with that video ready to go. One interesting thing, and I don't know for sure what kind of magic they use to make this happen, but these patterns that are listed here are actual renderings. This is a preview of the pattern with this theme. So if I were to go and change themes, let's say we switch over to Seedlit, which is a relatively new theme. I can load it. The site looks completely different. Blocks still work because they're separate from the theme. And then if I want to edit that post again, and I go to patterns, first of all, Seedlit actually registers several block patterns on its own. But I scroll down here and you see how these used to be tan. They're no longer tan because the new theme doesn't use tan as the primary background. So you can see that they all have been live updates basically to reflect a a little closer to what you're going to get on the front end.
Stacey, I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Wondering what's the difference between, creating the reusable blocks and registering that block?
Well, out of the box, the code is the difference. Because you don't need code to create a reusable block.
Right, but are you doing the same thing? Or are they used in different ways?
The way that WordPress works with it is different. Because of the centrally managed nature of the reusable blocks. So there is definitely a distinction between the two. But they feel very similar to one another. So it can take a little time to wrap your head around it.
Are you asking related to like front end output?
I guess, are they both local, like to your site? I mean, it's what's the advantage?
It's all local to your site.
Yeah,
right now it's all local to your site, but at some point there will probably be a block pattern directory where people can submit their block patterns to share, and then you can add them to your site with a click, just like you add the registered block patterns. But that, I don't know how long that's going to be before it's available, but it is being developed.
I guess I'm trying to understand, the output is the same. You can create the same block in two different ways.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's not the same. If you go back to Daisy's example of the dog, right? If you use a reusable block, it's going to be the same dog on every page.
Right.
If you use a pattern, it's going to be different. You can change the image, the name, and all that. The output's different.
I understand that part.
Okay.
Sorry, it's the registering the block in code. It's just a different way of saving a reusable block, right?
It basically, yeah. I mean, really at the code level, but you're not working with code when you're doing reusable blocks because WordPress gives you an interface to work with.
Right.
You create your block or your group of blocks, you save them as reusable, and then it converts what you have in your post or your page to a reusable block. That instance is then reusable, but then it's also registered or saved so that you can use it again.
Okay.
And it displays in a similar way. So it displays in a very similar way. So I have my patterns. So it gives me the preview of what they look like, and the reusable, but the reusable doesn't give me as much information. Okay.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
All right. I was going to go somewhere else. Oh, I was going to look at the plugins. Okay, so this plugin, VK Block Patterns, it's not the only option. It's an option. I chose this one because it uses both the block patterns and the category. So I already did one. I called this my category. It's just like a post category or a post category because you can put hierarchy in it. So it's a taxonomy from using WordPress terminology. And then this is just a custom post type that allows you to access the Gutenberg or the block editor. And I saved the same block pattern here that I registered with the code. This was something that I set up previously. So this is doing the same thing as the code, but it's saving it to your database instead. Whether or not you're comfortable, saving things to the database is a big question mark. If this plugin were to be deactivated, any times you had used it in the past would be fine, but you would lose the block patterns for future use because they would all still be in your database, but you wouldn't have access to them. But this is a much easier way to save block patterns than with registering them in the code.
To make sure I understood what you just said correctly, you said that if I was to go and create, 6 patterns with this VK block patterns and used it for a while on a site and then deactivated the plugin, the patterns I've already added to pages or posts will remain there and continue to function, but I can't create more?
Correct. And you wouldn't be able to use the ones you previously created again. They would no longer be registered because the plugin is what's registering them to your site. So there are some potential pros and cons to using the plugin versus using code. One is if you have a client and you don't want them messing around with your layouts, you want them to use the ones you created for them, putting it in the code is going to be safer for your client. They'll call you a lot less often when they've accidentally gone into the wrong screen and broken the pattern that you created for them. But if you're working on your own site and you're comfortable with working with it in the UI, excuse me, and you want to be able to edit them easily, it is an awful lot easier to work with this in this way.
Not to derail you too far, but do you have off the top of your head an idea of which would be better for page speed?
It shouldn't matter because at the front end, it's always going to be the same thing. It's not relying on the plugin to build that code in any way.
Okay.
It isn't like registering a custom post type with a plugin where it's relying on the database to build it every time you load your site. From that perspective, I would not feel reservations from a speed perspective to do it this way.
Okay, thank you.
What I understand, what I understand from you is that once the block pattern is registered, and once we have added that particular block pattern to the page, the block pattern does not exist anymore. It is now the sequence of the blocks which are available in the pattern. So anyways, it's going to be stored in a database like any other sequence of blocks. So
yes,
the entire block pattern concept has been gone now.
Well, the block pattern's still registered, so you can use it again, but it won't be used in the case of the one that you already inserted. So it's really like a layout or a template.
Okay, and as far as I understand, once I add a particular block pattern, I can edit it as well as regular blocks. I can add certain blocks in between 2 blocks, and all those things can also happen, right? So the pattern is not rigid. It is something which we can change. We can add and remove elements from there. It's just
it's
in the point of adding, right?
Yeah, it's very flexible. So you use it as a starting point, and then you can work with it. But anything that you do with the anything that you do with the blocks that you use the block pattern to insert will not affect the block pattern that's registered in any way.
Definitely. Thank you.
Any other questions? I'd love to allow you guys to go play a little.
I have a question. I'm not sure if you're the right person for that question, but I'll still ask it. So, like, we have a very easy interface for reusable blocks where we can make the entire block and add it as one of the reusable blocks. Why that option is not available with the block patterns?
Okay. You were breaking up a little bit. I'm not sure I got the whole question.
Asim, there seems to be a little distortion. You might need to type in your question if.
Am I audible now? Is it better now?
No.
You sound like Skynet. It's taking over.
I'll just type it.
That's how Daft Punk makes their music. You know, ever listen to Daft Punk?
Daisy, while he's typing that into the chat, I think I heard you mention earlier that we could put our patterns, we can code it directly in the functions.php file. Is that what you said?
Yeah, so the code that's in my plugin that I shared with you, you could drop that into functions.php. It would work the same way because it's adding the action on init. So it's very early in the loading process.
Awesome.
So I added that specifically so that you'd be able to use it in a theme.
Thank you.
That's a good question. So the question is why we don't have a easy interface for adding block patterns. I would say that what we have right now is kind of an MVP or minimum viable product for this feature. It's only been out for one version of WordPress. And I think that the teams might be waiting for some traction to form around it. But I think that if they were to hear that that there was interest in being able to manage these from the within WordPress, that would probably help speed things along. Hearing from users is I could yell from the mountaintops about it for days, and it might not get the same amount of attention as if 20 or 30 people were to comment on a GitHub issue. And the block editor code is all managed in a GitHub repo.
Okay, thank you.
Well, I'm not sure how to go forward from here. We've got about 15 minutes left in my presentation time. I could show you a few more tidbits about the block editor that I think might be helpful if you were going to create these as far as navigation goes, or you could spend a little time trying this, but I don't, it's 15 minutes, so you probably aren't going to make a humongous amount of progress. Any thoughts on that?
Sharing more tips would be good, I think. It's always good to learn.
Some of these they're not overly well known, I don't think. So, and you see these buttons, you don't necessarily know what a lot of them do. Like this one, if you click on the little eye, it'll give you some information about your document. This document outline is really useful. So you can kind of have an idea of what you've got going on in here. But one thing that I find extremely useful is the block navigation. That's the 3-step, like the step lines. It looks a little like a crooked hamburger menu. And you can see what blocks you have. So in this case, I've got media and text. And once I've got that selected, if I click on that again, then I can see all of the inner blocks. So when you're trying to access your blocks, sometimes you're like trying to click around, trying to click just in the right place to select it. I'm sure that everyone has had that experience. This can speed that up a little bit. The other thing is that you have breadcrumbs down here. So if you click on an inner block that's nested within other blocks, if you go down here, you have your top level document, then there's a media and text block, and then within that there's a list, and the list is the one that's selected right now. So if you have an extremely complex layout set up with blocks like groups and columns and a column, and then you have buttons and like a button block, and then you have the buttons within the button block, and then you have the text. It's like you could go many layers, and this can help you navigate all of that. So I find it to be helpful to be able to see where I'm at. There are other tools. If you have a client that you don't want to have access to a block, you can go into the block manager, and I don't know if this is persistent across the whole site or if it's just for your user. That would be something to test. But you can, or if there's if you want to just minimize the number of blocks that you see all the time because you only use 5 of them on your site, then you can hide a bunch of them just by unchecking them.
I believe that's a per user level, because I handed it off to a client after I got rid of lots of blocks, and then disasters happened.
So you can unregister blocks with PHP in your code. So that is the alternative. And I've received sites from agencies that do that extensively, because then I'll go in and try to work with the content. I'm like, wait a minute, where did it all go? So, which is very simple. It's like a 1-line unregister block. If you look it up in the documentation, then it's pretty simple. But any core block can be unregistered. You don't want to do that if you've already used it though, because then WordPress won't know what to do with the markup. Let's see. Keyboard shortcuts, or if you like to move quickly, I like keyboard shortcuts. I don't use them that much in WordPress, but what I do use a lot is the / command. So you start any block where it says, it'll say whatever it says, start writing, or type / to choose a block. It'll bring up blocks that you can use. It will bring up your reusable blocks. It will not bring up your block patterns, at least not right now. Let's see, what else can I show you? There's some options. Oh, if you want to see custom fields, you can turn them on. I haven't had really good luck with this, but your mileage may vary. I know that a lot of agencies will use advanced custom fields to create blocks. It's great for creating very easy to use forms for allowing your clients to add consistent content similar to a block pattern, but more constrained, and it takes a little bit more work to get it out to the front end. It's very easy to add it on the back end. It's not as easy to push it out to the front. Let's see. If you have this is an interesting tip. So if you have a paragraph block that has some HTML markup mixed in with it, let's see if it'll even work. Okay. Well, that didn't work. But okay, so I have this thing that I messed up. If I go to this ... here, and I can edit as HTML, I can go in and fix what I messed up. So without causing other problems. And then I can go back to visual, and then it's just the link instead of being in the middle of the text. This down arrow here will give you more options for the block. This is dynamically populated based on what is possible in that block. If you have a block, it's possible to transform, they say, to a different block. So it'll be a block that content can transform. So this isn't just every block possible. It's just the ones that WordPress knows what to do with this to turn it into one of these things. These insertion points. So there are lots of ways to add blocks to a post. One is you click up here, and this is the most featureful area. It feels organized, it's categorized. You get the patterns, and you get the reusable blocks, and you can search for blocks. But the other places you can add blocks are if your cursor is in a block, it'll show you to add, you can add another block after it. If you, let's see, sometimes if you hover, sometimes it's hard to get them to trigger, but it'll add, my cursor is inside this block, but it'll give me on hover an add block, and I can add another block after it.
Yeah, that part drives me nuts. Sometimes it's hard to add a block in between if you have a bunch of content or whatnot. And I'm like, just give me the plus. I want to click a plus right there.
Yes. And the design teams spend a lot of time talking about this. I can tell you that they're always looking for ways to make this better. And it's not an easy problem to solve, because you're usually going to give something up by changing it. All right, one more thing that might be useful to some people is that right now I'm in edit mode, which means I can click around and I can go right into any of these blocks. If you click this little pencil icon, you can go into select mode. And now if I hover around, it'll let me hover to the specific blocks, and it tells me what block it is. Now I can't, well, normally I wouldn't be able to edit it, but I guess if you click again, it switches it back to edit mode. So it's always something new to learn.
That's for sure. Well,
Any
cool.
other
Thank
questions?
you, Daisy.
I had a question. That spot where you showed us in the right top corner where it was view the code editor, does that show you when you do that, like these things you have here, will they be, that's what I wanted to know, if they were one block or if they were, you had to go through each one and pick
This is every block. So
Okay.
each block is going to be starting with a comment that opens it, and then it ends the block. So, and then if you have blocks within blocks, then like this one here, we have at the top, it says WP media text. And then all the way down here, many blocks later, it closes. So they're kind of like HTML tags, opening and closing HTML tags, but from an HTML standpoint, they're just commented code. So WordPress knows what to do with this, but it won't show up on it won't be visible to your users.
Okay.
I have a question for you, Daisy. This is kind of just high level, your perspective, but you know, Gutenberg's the feature of WordPress, I think a lot of us feel, but there's kind of, you know, WordPress is 20 years old, not exactly a community of early adopters. You know, there's a lot of people kind of using the old thing still, where in the future, kind of everything that manifests as content will eventually be a block. How long do you think it's going to take for more of the community to kind of feel comfortable with Gutenberg? Like, I know we have full site editing coming that'll kind of make people feel a bit more comfortable. There's always more stuff, but kind of from your perspective, being closer to core, what do you think that timeline looks like? 18 months, 3 years? Like, what do you feel there?
Well, I think it's going to be a while before the old timers that are still pretty unhappy with the block editor really come around, and some of them may never come around. I've heard the phrase "somebody moved my cheese" a lot lately. That people are okay with it, but as soon as and we're making these changes, trying to stay up with so many other platforms, and the block editor concept is not limited to WordPress. So many tools are using it. Not necessarily all content management, but there are a lot of like note-taking apps that use block editors, Notion, and several similar apps use them. The Zoho alternative to Microsoft Word and Google Docs uses a block editor. It's not quite the same as what we have in WordPress, but it's definitely a trend in the way that content is being managed across way more than just WordPress. So I hope that as more apps start to adopt that model, that there will be a little less resistance to it, because it is very powerful. But I think the biggest valid complaints that I hear about it are, I just want to start typing. But I guess that as far as time goes, I think we just have to keep chipping away at it and continue to educate and encourage and improve the code base and like the things that are frustrating, like selecting a block or seeing what blocks you have on your page. Some of those kinds of interface issues, I think, will get resolved over time. And there are a lot of people working really hard on those problems. But sometimes you hear the loudest voices. So, and they're the ones that aren't necessarily all that happy.
That's good. And it feels like the professionals, the web pros that switched to it earlier will have an advantage later when it's the norm, because a lot of websites that are built today with the old stuff won't be relevant in the future. And if you have that skill, it's kind of an advantage, I would assume.
Yeah, and then you have the page builders thrown into that mix. And in my dream world, somebody would be creating a page builder with Gutenberg at the heart of it, and really embracing the block editor instead of trying to replace it. So whether or not that, I don't know if the block editor is ready for that yet, but it would be really cool to see somebody trying.
It definitely. So I'll share something later, but it definitely is. We've been experimenting with, because it's just a JavaScript component, right? It can really run with anything. So that's really exciting.
I was kind of thinking, speaking of page builders, I was kind of thinking as you were talking, Daisy, about, because I've been bored lately, so I've been picking a few arguments online on different forums. There's a lot of fans of like Divi and Elementor, and I am not a fan of them. And so I kind of have fun poking at people and talking about Gutenberg or whatnot sometimes when I'm bored. And so as you were talking, I kind of started thinking about how I could see how a page builder company or an agency could take and create almost a theme or almost a page builder, but out of patterns, right? If you want to have a unique format, or I'm sorry, a consistent format throughout your site, you could just make a pattern and go that approach.
Yeah, and full site editing, block-based theming is going to bring us a lot closer to that. There's a lot of potential there for block-based themes to be more like skins and less like traditional classic WordPress themes that require a lot of knowledge of the way the templating system of WordPress works. Instead of having a loop in your archive or your index.php file in your theme, you'll have a snippet of HTML, and then you use a query block to pull up your content. And basically then there's global styles coming. So you register your styles using a JSON file, and then the users can change things from their admin panel. The JSON file stays, so it could be reverted, but then they get to change, say, I don't like that color, and they can change something about, and then save it to their site. It's saved locally. It's going to be very interesting, but it is such a huge paradigm shift for anyone that's built themes for WordPress in the past.
Makes sense, absolutely. Cool. Well, any other questions, anybody? That was great, Daisy. Thank you very much for giving that presentation. I'll say that I've been using Gutenberg for quite a while, and I always see patterns over there, and I haven't taken 10 minutes to look at them. So sitting down and watching you kind of shows me how easy it is. So I'll definitely try some out over the next week or so and play with them.
Yeah, thanks, Daisy. This is awesome.
Thank you.
Yep.